Hey, I'm Miranda, and today I have a little bit more attitude. I'm a little extra sarcastic, if that's even possible. And before I even explain why and get into today's discussion, let me make my disclaimer. The people that I'm criticizing today are racist, overtly racist. So if you're a racist and you identify with something I said and you're offended, I can't help you. If you are in law enforcement and you're not racist, I'm not talking about you. But if you're racist, I'm talking about you. I'm definitely talking about you. I was going through the headlines this morning and reminded of these police officers who made overtly racist statements that they wanted to cull black people, set us back a few generations, or start a race war, casually just having this conversation amongst themselves because they didn't know their body cameras were recording it. Ugh. And reading that just brought up all these feelings about the Orangeburg Massacre. So today I'm going to talk about the Orangeburg Massacre because it was a pivotal moment in history and not enough people know about it. And then I will analyze it just a little bit to help you understand why it's relevant today. Let's get into it. The Orangeburg Massacre of 1968 occurred in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and it involved students from South Carolina State University. My parents are from South Carolina. My father was a student at SCSU when this happened. And I spent my first year of university at SCSU. I've heard about this massacre most of my life. To understand this event, you need to know three things. In 1963, South Carolina desegregated its schools, providing a legal precedent for the desegregation across the state. This massacre happened at the tail end of the civil rights movement within months of Dr. King's murder. And finally, despite SCSU being a historically black university, it had a white student population. Small, but it was there. This story begins in the autumn of 1967. Black students at SCSU just wanted to go bowling. Simple enough request, not outrageous, just bowling. They politely approached the owner of the local bowling alley and said, "Hey, can you please desegregate? We would like to bowl. You let the white students bowl here. Can we bowl? We just want to bowl." He said no, because, segregation. He was a fan. So over autumn and winter, there was some peaceful over and back, requests and denials. Owner still said no. He liked his segregation. So a few months later, on February 5th, a group of about 40 students peacefully walked in and requested to bowl. The owner said no, and they left. Peacefully. There was not a problem. But the next day, on February 6th, another group of students, led by John Stroman, went to the bowling alley to again peacefully request to bowl. And it was a whole problem. At some point, a window got broken, and then the police began arresting students. Students on the campus heard about that. A bunch of them went down there to protest. The police began beating them with billy clubs, injuring 8, sending them to the hospital.
They just started beating students, and personally, I was beaten by 2 officers. All I know is nightsticks across my head. And I was helpless. It was like they were trying to teach us a lesson.
Across the next couple of days, tensions mounted. The students issued a list of demands. They wanted an end to segregation. They wanted more racial equality. How dare they? These were considered outrageous ideas. Governor McNair was so triggered by these requests, he sent in the National Guard because black people asked for equality. Governor McNair said black power advocates were causing a threat in Orangeburg. Called them agitators. This all came to a head on February the 8th, 2 days after the bowling alley incident. 200 peaceful student protesters started a contained bonfire on campus, not at the bowling alley, not in Orangeburg, on their own campus. Apparently, that was super offensive to the white supremacists. State highway patrolmen were sent in. Firefighters were sent in to put out the bonfire. Police hurled insults at the students hurled insults back. At some point, I think the students started throwing trash at let me fact check. Yeah, I was right. So racial insults were thrown, trash and more insults were thrown back. It was a whole thing. And then some kind of piece of wood hit an officer, and that's all it took to trigger a massacre. So you had a group of 200 students whose only weapons were their mouths. The law enforcement officers opened fire with revolvers and shotguns, and for about 12 seconds, just...
I got up to run, and I took one step. That's all I could remember. I took that one step, I got hit in the back. When I got hit in the back, this is when I got paralyzed.
I remember getting shot in my face and being spun around, and instinct said, you got to get out of here, you got to go for safety. And the only thing I could think of was get into the infirmary.
Just so happened, there was a trash can in front of me. I was on a pretty good coverage there, that trash can, see, but the trash can had some legs on it. And that's how I got shot in the hip. The bullet come under the leg, under the trash can, and caught me in the hip. And under the trash can, it caught me in the leg. If it wasn't for the trash can, I probably would have been dead.
Recently, my older brother asked my dad where he was that day. Mind you, my dad has Parkinson's, so he won't be looking directly in the camera.
So what can you tell me about the Orangeburg Massacre?
Well, I remember that I was in my dorm. There was a kid that came running inside the building, was yelling, "They're shooting them! They're shooting them!" And my roommate and I went down to look, but we all saw the crowd that was hanging around after that. That's all I have to say.
If my dad had not been studying, I might not be here. So what are this atrocity stats? 27 people were injured and 3 young men lost their lives. Samuel Hammond, Henry Smith, and Delano Middleton. The murder of Delano Middleton is ridiculous. He was a high school student. His mom worked at SCSU, and he was just sitting on the steps waiting for her to get off of work and was murdered. Why? 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 Everything about this tragedy makes me angry, but what makes me extra mad is the media spin that was put on it and the lies that were told by law enforcement and by the governor.
We are urging everybody to use restraint and to refrain from violence and doing anything that would precipitate another incident such as this, the throwing of bombs, the shooting of weapons in the direction of police officials and officers is a dangerous thing. And it can only bring a response from them when it gets to the point that the policeman who's moving in to protect a fire truck to put out a fire at a private residence suddenly falls to the ground with blood flowing from him, and he has to, and nobody knew whether he'd been hit by a bullet or what at the moment.
The police officers. Law enforcement said they had to shoot on these unarmed students because a sniper was shooting on them. An investigation proved this to be an outrageous lie. And then after all of this hit the media, the governor said, oh, this didn't even happen on campus. Outside Black Power agitators came in and riled all this up, except for all the photo evidence of this having happened on campus and the hundreds of eyewitnesses to this. It was outside agitators. Nothing about the police just opening fire on unarmed students. In fairness, the federal government tried to bring charges against the officers, but they were acquitted because they said they feared for their lives. Does that sound familiar to you? It sounds familiar to me. And yet, thanks to systemic racism, Cleveland Sellers in 1970 spent 7 months in prison for being one of those outside agitators for the bowling alley incident on February the 6th. He was pardoned in 1993 by the then acting governor of South Carolina, but as you can see, this massacre stirs up feelings in me today. I think about the protesters that are out there being tear gassed and rubber bulleted, having all these things happen to them because they have the audacity to want equality and freedom for minorities and the disabled and the mentally ill and the disenfranchised. But folks want to keep their racist monuments because they say without them we are doomed to repeat our past. We are currently repeating our past. Folks say we shouldn't protest and march because it's just increasing racial tensions. But do these same people talk to police officers and say, hey, police brutality is increasing racial tensions. Maybe you should stop brutalizing minorities and the disenfranchised and the mentally ill and the disabled. Maybe stop that. Maybe if you stop that, racial tensions wouldn't be on the rise. I absolutely do not understand why the onus, all the responsibility for lowering racial tensions are on the minorities. We are not the ones that caused this problem in the first place. Enslavement caused it. Slave codes, the black codes, Jim Crow, redlining, voter suppression, and police brutality. These are the root of the problem. And if protesting makes you feel uncomfortable, you need to examine yourself. Because why are you okay with these systems staying in place? And if you are of the opinion that you don't want systemic racism to stay in place, but you also don't like protesting, what do you suggest? Tell me what you suggest we should do. How are we going to end it? How? At the end of the day, we just want to go bowling. We want to go for a jog. We want to sleep peacefully and safely in our beds. But systemic racism. It facilitates public figures and politicians just lying about events. It enables law enforcement officers with racist beliefs to just murder black people. And it emboldens outright racists. Right now, as I'm recording this video, the people who tried to lynch that man experience no consequences. The state declined to do anything. Why do you think that is? I share all of this to say the Orangeburg Massacre isn't an isolated or outdated incident. All these things are still happening today. We're all still fighting for an end to discrimination. We're all still fighting for equality. I am both encouraged by the protest and saddened by the necessity for them. I really hope that this information and the analysis helps you. It helps me to get it all out of my head. My intention, other than just to clear my own mind, is to arm you with information so that you can go forward and be an ally or just understand race relations in the United States. Without understanding our history, we cannot understand what's going on today. Thanks again. Maybe if you like these videos, follow me on Facebook or subscribe on YouTube. I would appreciate your support, but it's not compulsory. I'll chat to you soon. Bye.